The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today I'm going to be talking about awakening the heart of compassion. What helps us to awaken to compassion and what hinders us from awakening to compassion. And in a sense, we've been talking about this all week in different ways. But today I'm going to mention a few things which I think will help and some things that will hinder. And I'm also, as usual, going to read from my many stacks of books here as well. We are all different and we all relate to compassion in different ways. However, we can commit to living a compassionate life no matter how we relate to compassion itself. Some people don't necessarily feel compassion, but respond to needs. So it's not about feeling compassion, it's about committing to a compassionate life and making that your priority so that when someone comes to talk to you and you need to get something done on your computer, well, what is truly important here? Should I stop and talk to this person who is in need, or do I say no, I'm too busy? So it's looking at that, and after all, Kanzeon Avalokiteshvara is the one who's willing to hear the cries of the world, and we can become as Avalokiteshvara. So it's a matter of responding to listening, to responding to what is good to do, to not letting tiredness, fear, or inadequacy stop you from saying yes when something is good to do. And you can let each day just unfold. I remember one day thinking, gee, I really have to do something good today. And then I said, no, just let the day unfold and see what happens. Maybe the good thing to do is just to be kind to yourself and rest. We just don't know. Some of the ways we can lead a compassionate life are by practicing the 4 Brahma Viharas, which I talked about a bit yesterday, and I'm going to talk about more today. The 4 wisdoms, charity or generosity, tenderness, benevolence, and sympathy. And also Reverend Master Ji added gratitude to that. And the 6 paramitas, which I'm going to read a little bit about today. I can't talk about all these things in one talk. Each one would take a number of talks. So I'm just going to mention them, and it's something you can think about and look at and see what fits in, what works for you. One of the things that opens our hearts to our innate compassion is not turning away from suffering, either our own or others. And I had spent my whole life trying not to look at suffering. And then my cat, Maisie, whom I love dearly, had this terrible thing going on just before she died that killed her. And I couldn't not look at her suffering. And I think this can happen when someone we love is dying, whether it's a pet or a relative or a good friend, is that we can't look away from the suffering. We need to embrace it. And so I did. And it didn't mean that the suffering was there all the time. It was sometimes there and sometimes not. But I had to not turn away because that was important for her to have a good death, was my being there for her. And it just shows me that we are given what we need to open our hearts. What else encourages compassion? Well, taking the time to listen to others and being completely present when talking with someone. Sometimes we have a lot to do, and we're talking to someone, but we're out the door at the same time. And you can tell when you go to a doctor or a nurse practitioner, whether they're there with you really listening. And I have to say, the nurse practitioner I see, who happens to be Reverend Master Daishan's sister, she's right there listening, and you don't get the feeling like one foot is out the door. It's a really nice feeling when people are like that. And we can give that to other people. Treating everything and everyone, including ourselves, with respect and kindness, and letting go of selfishness. Another thing that came up for me just this morning was self-restraint. Yesterday, it was I guess yesterday was the 4th day. I had done, 5 Dharma talks and 2 days of spiritual counseling and 2 discussions, which were all great, but I was tired. And I noticed I had to really practice self-restraint, because when I get tired, I want to snap at people, get away from me, don't bother me. And I just had to, I wasn't feeling compassion, but the compassionate thing was self-restraint. And we can always practice that. I'm going to read something from Faces of Compassion, the book that I sent you one chapter from. And this is in regards to listening. Listening is a wonderful thing to do for someone. And sometimes, as he says in here, that's all we have to do. We don't have to do anything else. And this is what Reverend Taigen says. Avalokiteshvara is the one who calmly hears and considers all of the world's sounds of woe. This name implies that empathy and active listening are primary practices of compassion. Just to be present, to remain upright and aware in the face of suffering without needing to react reflexively is compassion. Kanzeon acknowledges beings and their cries and responds when appropriate or when it would be useful. Often when we are troubled, what we most yearn for is this acceptance, to be heard and have our pain recognized. Such attentive presence may be more the essence of compassion than our attempts to problem solve, to manipulate the world or our psyches in order to fix difficult situations. I had a thought come up, but it was gone by the time I got to the end of the sentence. That's what happens sometimes as you get older. This careful observation of the words and cries is the compassionate practice of counselors and therapists, empathetically giving their presence and paying attention to the conflicts and confusion of others. Considering all the many manifestations encompassed by Avalokiteshvara, however, we might also remember to carefully regard our own cries, the suffering of all the beings included within us. We cannot offer compassion to others if we cannot be compassionate, accepting, and forgiving of ourselves. We can hear and acknowledge our own feelings of fear, frustration, and anger with calm uprightness, rather than needing to react externally and act them out inappropriately, which is self-restraint. The Dalai Lama is a very good example of listening deeply. And this is what people have said in regard to the Dalai Lama, that when he's talking to you, he is completely present with you as if you were the only person there. And what that does for someone is, it's really a wonderful thing when that's done for you, and we can do that to other people. And this is what Taigen Leighton says about the Dalai Lama. In his lectures and teaching around the world, the Dalai Lama appears not as a leader, but as simply as a humble monk. His gentleness, humor, and ready kindness are apparent. When listening to the Dalai Lama speak, his sound, tone, and presence are as notable as the contents of what is said. This does not come across in written transcripts or even tapes, but clearly reflects the archetypal aspect of Avalokiteshvara's relationship to sound. Like Avalokiteshvara, observantly hearing the sounds of the world's beings, the Dalai Lama listens very attentively to people, carefully and buoyantly. With his broad concern, he has carried out open dialogues with diverse peoples about their attitudes and traditional spiritualities. After participating in a cross-cultural dialogue between the Dalai Lama and a number of Jewish scholars and rabbis, the Orthodox Jewish teacher Rabbi Zalman Schachter said of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, "There were times I was close to tears just from the intensity of his listening." Well, I forgot. Let's see. Where's that other page? Nope, it's not here. The Dalai Lama is a human being, just as we are, and we can practice this deep listening when we're with other people, if it's a good thing to do. Yesterday, oh, don't tell me I forgot it. I forgot something. Well, it's way in my room. It's the Four Brahma Viharas. Unless you could check in my bag outside just to see if, no, I don't think it's there. No, it's just a little booklet. Do you have it nearby?
No.
Oh, Reverend Ando, bless you. Okay, so I was going to read you from this booklet on the Four Brahma Viharas, which I started to talk about yesterday, but we ran out of time. And I wanted to read you especially what Ajahn Susito says about loving kindness, and of loving kindness being non-aversion. But I will come back to that, since I'm pretty sure I forgot it in, bringing all these other books here with me. I thought this talk might end up being somewhat spontaneous, but I didn't expect it to be spontaneous in this way. So practicing the four wisdoms, charity, tenderness, benevolence, and sympathy, and the six paramitas are some of the ways to lead a compassionate life. And Dogen, Great Master Dogen, talks about the four wisdoms in the Shushogi, which you can read about in Roar the Tigris, Volume 1, Chapter 4, The Mind of a Bodhisattva. And I thought I would read what Reverend Master Jiyu says about sympathy, because I think that reflects what we've been talking about in regards to compassion. If one can identify oneself with that which is not oneself, one can understand the true meaning of sympathy. Oh, bless you, Reverend Ando. Reverend Ando, when I was out at the Hermitage, I remembered this article and I called her, and she found it in my room and read it to me. And then, bless her heart, she made a copy for herself. So her copy was nearby, and I've got it right here. So, but since I've started on sympathy, I will come back to the article. If one can identify oneself with that which is not oneself, one can understand the true meaning of sympathy. The danger of this is of leaving oneself out of it altogether and only seeing others. A lot of people do this and think they are identifying with others, whereas they have not really seen that what they've done is become do-gooders instead. To identify with another is to see, there but for the grace of Buddha go I. To recognize identically the same thing in yourself that is going on in another person. I can remember someone being very horrified to realize, and this was someone who had been very much against gay people, that what he was afraid of was that he might be the same way. To be able to identify with them as a possibility. Oh my God, I could be that way. Well, of course, we don't see gay people in that way. Yes, you could, and there's nothing wrong with it, because your job is finding the eternal. Sympathy is based on knowing oneself intimately. Yes, I have aspects of bigotry, and given the right circumstances, I could murder someone. Think about it from that angle. Have a good look at yourself and see the potentials within yourself. Then when you see someone else, you won't judge that person, but realize that you could be in the same situation. Understand his situation. Look well at his situation or hers and realize, yes, I could be that way. And would I want this to happen to me? Judgmentalism is the big opposite of genuine sympathy, judging others. I am not like that can be a judgmental statement. But if you say, I pray that I may not be like that, you're recognizing that you could be. There's just a different tiny little shift in mind in the way in which you look at it, because you are recognizing you could be that way and wishing to help rather than to judge and push out of the way. And sometimes when we see people causing great harm, one of the reasons that it's very painful, besides the fact that they're causing great harm, is just what Reverend Master Jiyu is saying, is that we know that that we have that potential. And I think I was reading a book that Gandhi wrote, and he said something about, when I see what my own mind is doing, it's very hard to judge other people, because we all have all kinds of different thoughts going through our mind. And we all have a potential to cause harm, and that's why we work on ourselves. We also have the potential of being deeply compassionate people. And I think that we are all heading in that direction. So now I am going to go back to the four Brahma Viharas, the four immeasurables that I started to talk about yesterday. And I want to just read a little bit about what Ajahn Sucitto says about them in general, and then I'm going to read to you what he says about loving kindness. Within our conscious experience, most of us can recognize that there are things we resist or dismiss, things we shut out, things that make us slightly nervous, things we disapprove of. There are things we are interested in, things we aren't particularly interested in, things we are mildly interested in, all the way down to things we distinctly detest. In short, we have holding patterns or resistance impressions in our field of awareness. Our ability to relate, to empathize and respond is contained within a boundary of resistance beyond which we do not relate. We freeze up. We may find ourselves in certain situations and we go numb. There can be people who we shut out or resist. One can even get a sense of violence and aggression towards the people and things we don't like, because violence and aggression are often reactions against being hemmed in. But in our own aversion that hems us in, the Brahma Viharas are our primary means of getting past these limitations. They all have the quality of relaxing the boundaries of one's permission, the boundaries of one's responsiveness, the boundaries of one's sensitivity, so that responsiveness, sensitivity, and empathy are enlarged. And because of this enlargement, the apparent subject, we ourselves, is also enlarged. We become more fluent, more responsive, not so shut in or narrow. It becomes something that has the ability to be flexible and to respond to a number of states. These are the main features to recognize in the Brahma Viharas. And what I really wanted to do is read to you metta on loving kindness. The Buddha described these things in characteristically negative terms. Loving kindness, for example, is non-aversion. We think, well, love is a nice thing to feel, and oodles of it is even better. Oodles and oodles, better yet. Love can be seen as a really bubbly, sweet state, but non-aversion is more like saying, well, I've known you all this time, and there's no aspect of you that I'm averse to. You might get a response such as, well, thanks a lot. We like to think of metta as that sweet state rather than non-aversion, but not to move in distaste or fear around any aspect of oneself or another. Any bodily aspect or mental states or behavior is more profound. Non-aversion is really something. It indicates what doesn't happen, how the mind doesn't contract. This is a more accurate description of metta. And I'm going to stop for just a moment here so that you can just kind of take this in, because I think it's really an important point to look at. What do we pull away from within ourselves and within our lives? Love is a terribly overused and exhausted word. You can love everything from French fries to automobiles. It's like sugar. We just throw it on everything. But what we actually want to cultivate is the capacity to acknowledge aversion, of not wanting this and feeling uneasy or tense about that, and to relax out of it. We don't have to think everything is great. We just have to keep from stiffening up and pushing things away. That's non-aversion. The heart is larger. The aim of the Brahma Viharas is to arrive at a place of serenity rather than bubbly enthusiasm. Developing this capacity involves seeing the difference between an object and our response to it. Things are not essentially detestable. Something in us picks up what we dislike. The more we rest in the understanding of the ephemeral and signless nature of things, the more we realize that all signs are put there by us, not consciously, but by the karmic patterns of the mind. This is not something we do deliberately. We may even feel helpless to respond in a different way. I can't help but dislike spiders. I just can't stand them. Our karmic proclivities lock on to a particular response, and we often feel that we can't do anything about that, but we can. We can begin to recognize the object and to notice that the aversion to the object is not the object. That's another layer of experience that's put on the object or the person or the state or the experience. That's a behavior. It's a mental behavior. We can also have really dark impressions of ourselves that are unnecessary, unskillful, and useless. True, Sometimes we feel helpless in relation to our patterns of mind, our habits, our karma, but then we get depressed. How is that helpful? As the practice matures, we begin to separate the experience of immediate contact from the response. We see the two as distinct, and we see that the response, the reaction, the behavior, the thing we are adding on takes effort. That behavior is an enacted thing. You don't find yourself in a relaxed state of hatred. I like that. You're charged up. The mind is engaged, activated. And through this process of developing meditation, you can feel that activation, that change. You can feel energy, you can feel effort, and you can also put it down. You can begin to relax that involuntary effort. One of the trainings in meditation is learning how to make effort, something that is voluntary and useful. We learn how to relax, how to step back, how to move forward, how to home in, and how to back off. We learn to recognize and to relax the effort that fuels aversion to things. That's non-aversion. And when you do that a little bit, interestingly enough, you begin to see the lovableness of things. Things in themselves are just what they are. They're rather wonderful because they are what they are. They're not there to annoy us or to delight us. They are what they are. There's a uniqueness that makes all things have a lovable character. And to love them means to let them be what they are. That's what loving is. Loving means permission, granting something the permission to be what it is, including yourself. That is love, rather than some sort of ebullient state. So that's something to think about. When I think about this, I do see myself in certain situations retracting. And when I don't, when I just relax into it, I see what it is that it's stirring up in me. So then there are the 6 perfections that we can work on, but I think I'm not going to talk about them this morning. I think that would take too long. But what I'm going to talk about is some of the obstacles to leading a compassionate life. And as I mentioned yesterday, the far enemy of compassion is cruelty. And I think that's pretty obvious. When you purposely act in an unkind way, you cut yourself off from your compassionate heart. But all the many different aspects of all the kind of spectrum of cruelty, anger, judgments, what did I write down here? Criticism, righteous indignation, outrage. These are all enemies of compassion. So we have to be really careful about some of these, with what is going on in the world today and all the time. We have to be very careful of this righteous indignation and outrage at what is going on, because that cuts us off from our compassionate heart. I was interested to see that one of the things that can cut us off from compassion is fear of compassion itself. And although I've read a lot to you today, I would really like to read you a few more things about fear of compassion. This is from the Book of Joy. We fear compassion because we're afraid of experiencing the suffering, the vulnerability, and the helplessness that can come with having an open heart. Psychologist Paul Gilbert found that many people are afraid that if they are compassionate, they will be taken advantage of, that others will become dependent on them, and that they won't be able to handle others' distress. One of the differences between empathy and compassion is that while empathy is simply experiencing another's emotion, compassion is a more empowered state where we want what is best for the other person. As the Dalai Lama had described it, if we see a person who is being crushed by a rock, the goal is not to get under the rock and feel what they are feeling, it is to help to remove the rock. Many people are also afraid of receiving compassion from others because they are afraid that others will want something in return, or that they will at least feel indebted. Finally, many people are even afraid of being self-compassionate because they are afraid they will become weak, that they will not work as hard, or that they will be overcome with sadness and grief. Gilbert says, compassion can flow naturally when we understand and work to remove our fears, our blocks, and our resistances to it. Compassion is one of the most difficult and courageous of all our motivations, but it is also the most healing and elevating. And I think, as we talked about before, if we can balance compassion with wisdom, then we do not have to fear feeling compassion and offering compassion to other beings and to ourselves. Another obstacle to being compassionate is wanting to be compassionate or wanting to be seen as compassionate. You don't have to try and be compassionate. Just relax and trust in your innate goodness. Two other obstacles to compassion are distractions, distracting ourselves with all our computers and surfing the net and all kinds of things. That can distract us from just being present. And what is called time stress. Which is you feel like you're too busy. It's like the doctor with one foot out the door. I remember the first time I went to see a doctor for my back, and I thought it was a very complex problem, and he had 15 minutes to go through my whole back problem and help me figure out what to do. And I could feel, he was even backing up as we were getting close to our 15 minutes. So, and he might have been a very compassionate person, but sometimes, feeling that we're stressed for time can affect us just stopping and taking the time to listen and be there for someone, because that may be much more important than where we're trying to get to. So balancing compassion and wisdom, that is the important thing. Well, I'll just read you here what I wrote. When I was writing this talk at the Hermitage, I wrote this: I have to say that after spending so much time reading about, meditating on, and thinking about compassion and how to bring it into our lives, that all that it entails is a very tall order. It is important and it isn't easy, so we need to be kind to ourselves and not judge ourselves for where we are right now. The fact that you have all signed up for this retreat shows me that there is a great interest in what compassion is and how to bring it more into our lives. And that in itself is very cheering. So I've had a little time stress this morning because It's 11:40 and I've been reading a lot, and I've decided not to read everything that I have so that this Dharma talk isn't too long. But I could end with one short thing from Step by Step, where he talks about think before you speak, because our thinking is so important in how we act. And he says, the thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into the habit hardens into the character gives birth to the destiny. So watch your thoughts with care and let them spring from love, born out of respect for all beings. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.